Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're glad to see you and really looking forward to a really robust conversation with a great set of panelists. And you'll have time at the end to come in with some questions, and so we'll look forward to that as well. I'm Chrissy McHenry. I'm the managing principal for our strategic communications practice area here at Raben, and I'm delighted to be the moderator for today's events. I thought I'd start by introducing the panel to you. We'll jump into some questions. We'll use my questions first, and then we'll turn to the rest of you as time goes on. It's a conversation, so to the three of you panelists, if you have something to say and you want to jump in, we can deal with a little messiness. Either jump in or find some way to signal me, and I'll call on you. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to hear from you all as we go along. So I'll start with introductions. Alvaro Bedoya is here with us. He's the senior advisor for the American Civil Liberties Project and a former commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission. He is focused on how antitrust law can do more to protect workers and labor unions, and has warned against rapidly advancing workplace surveillance technology. He previously served as chief counsel to Senator Al Franken. He founded the Center on Privacy and Technology at Georgetown Law. A naturalized citizen and longtime advocate for immigrant rights, Bedoya's writings have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Atlantic. So welcome. Thank you. We also have with us Barbara McQuaid. She's a professor at Michigan Law, a former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, appointed by President Barack Obama, and the first woman to hold that position. She's a legal analyst for NBC News and MSNBC, the author of Attack from Within: How Disinformation is Sabotaging America. Her work focuses on criminal law, criminal procedure, national security, data privacy, and civil rights. And her commentary has appeared in outlets such as the Washington Post, Foreign Policy, Lawfare, National Public Radio, and others. She's been quoted in the New York Times, Time, Newsweek, Politico, and other publications. So welcome, Barbara.
Thank you.
And finally, Terrence Woodbury is the CEO of HIT Strategies. It's a leading public opinion firm focused on understanding and mobilizing underrepresented voters. He's worked with the DNC, DSCC, Rockefeller Foundation, the Gates Foundation, other major organizations to help shape their research and outreach. Named to Politico's Recast 2023 Power List and the American Association of Consultants 40 Under 40, class of 23. His insights appear regularly in the Washington Post, Politico, Wall Street Journal, The Hill, USA Today, NPR, and on CNN. Also MSNBC and Showtime's The Circus. So here we are, and I thought we'd just jump right in. So I wanted to start with you, Barbara. Your book, Attack from Within: How Disinformation is Sabotaging America. How does propaganda exploit fear, identity, or uncertainty? And why does it work so well?
Yeah, it's such a great question. It really preys upon some of the cognitive forces that all of us have. I mean, everybody has an instinct for fear. It is ingrained in us. It is instinctual. It is something that protects us from threats, external threats, whether it's, predators or storms or other kinds of things. But it is particularly acute during times of change, especially rapid change. We are fearful of losing what we have. We are fearful of things today like changing demographics, the obsolescence of our work through, change in from one energy source to another, from some sorts of work to artificial intelligence. All of those things can be things that cause people to feel some uncertainty. And so there are people who will exploit those fears in society by stoking division, by, talking about Black and brown people want to replace you, is something that resonates with a lot of people. There are elites in society who look down on you and don't care that you are being left behind as technology evolves. Those kinds of things make all of us susceptible to someone who will come in and prey on those kinds of resentments and grievances and fears. There's a great book by Doris Kearns Goodwin called Leadership During Tumultuous Times. And one of the things she talks about in that book is the great leadership of Theodore Roosevelt, who lived in times that might be in some ways parallel to our own. We were, turning from the 19th to the 20th century. And she talks about how it was a time of fear for a lot of people because we were shifting from an agrarian society to an industrial society. We now had the ability to see international newspapers from around the world and learn about frightening things like wars and famines and other things that were happening around the world. And we had new waves of immigrants coming into the United States from places like Italy and Poland and other places where people didn't speak English and were different from us and other. But rather than prey on those fears and stoke division in society, Theodore Roosevelt did just the opposite. And he leaned into it. And he said, isn't it great that we have all of these new workers to come into the United States so that our children no longer have to work in factories? We can send them to school and they don't have to worry about these kinds of things. He said, isn't it great that we have all of this technological innovation that allows us to free women and children from the workplace, or that allows us to bust up some of these monopoly corporations that are gouging the consumer? And so by leaning into all of the change in the world and all the ways it could be good for society, he brought people together and advanced human progress. And so change does not have to be something that is feared, but it is something that can be exploited by people who want to do that.
Now, that's such a great perspective, and it's an interesting, at least to me, that sort of the next thought is this cyclical or is this some special moment? And so, Alvaro, you've spent your career connecting privacy, surveillance, civil rights, and most recently as an FTC commissioner. What should we understand about how today's propaganda is amplified by data-driven algorithms and surveillance systems? Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sure. I mean, what was the question again? It's how what is amplified? Could you say that
How
again?
is
Yeah.
today's propaganda amplified by data-driven algorithms? I mean, all of this that we're seeing,
Yeah.
and surveillance systems both. I mean, that combination of that, the advancements in technology, have they amplified or sort of forced us into a space that is not where we were in the example that Barbara gave, but
Yeah.
out of our control?
Sure. So I think you have two dynamics going on. The first is the creation of private echo chambers for everyone who is on social media, where the algorithms in each of these platforms quickly learns what you're interested in, gets a rough sense of your political views, and serves you up content that is responsive to those views. And so, you used to have a third or half of the adult population of the country tuning into Edward R. Murrow, at a specific time of the evening. It's like the dinosaur era now. I mean, now you have everyone watching the newscast that they prefer. In the Spanish speaking population, you do have a little bit less of that with these two kind of dominant news systems. But even within that population, you have people accessing and getting their news increasingly on short form video on social media, on platforms that if you're not on TikTok, you haven't even heard of. And so you have a fragmentation of the ecosystem where everyone is served their own private kind of news feed. And then the other thing is you have the gamification of content that naturally tends to promote the most sensationalistic content. And so one thing that a lot of people have noticed happened after Elon Musk took over X is or took over Twitter, renamed it X, and basically took off all the few guardrails that existed, is that the For You page is this extraordinary cesspool of, truly cesspool in every sense of the word. It's just lots of violence, a lot of interracial violence. There's a lot of just almost voyeuristic coverage of accidents and acts of violence. and there is, overtly bigoted content. And there's a world where behind the scenes, he's just increasing that dial. The other thing that may be happening, which I don't think is any less bad, is I think he's basically letting the algorithm just feed people what they want to see. And the sad fact that social media platforms have discovered is, and they are complicit in. Let me be really clear. This isn't just some force of nature that they have, some property of nature they've discovered. They've tapped into the fact that, you know, in the same way that you slow down when there's an accident, just because you have this interest in seeing what it is, that is at a very basic human level. We have that on social media as well. And so these algorithms are feeding the most sensationalistic content, both in terms of images, audio, video, as well as the words, right? The text that's being served up. So those are all dynamics that we're reckoning with now.
So, Terrence, it leads me to you and thinking about, sort of in your research, what kind of messages actually sort of cut through the noise? What helps to build trust with people who feel disillusioned, alienated, exhausted, but also unsure of what's true?
Yeah, but a lot of people are exhausted. There's a lot of fatigue, not just in mis and disinformation, but generally in media coverage and news coverage of current events. And so you see a lot of folks just checking out, this kind of voluntary withdrawal from covering politics. I hear folks in focus groups tell me almost every day that they haven't watched the news since election day. And so, for those folks, the world might be burning, but they have checked out from it. To answer your question about the messages that break through, it, to determine the most effective messages, we first have to understand the motive, the reason for the mis and disinformation. That is, it is a tool of special interest to pit us against each other, to make us believe that our problems are because of people that are not like us. That the zero sum um, proposition is a part of the mis and disinformation, the scarcity mindset that there's not enough for everyone. And that's why if that group is getting more, then you have to get less. It is, it's the guy that makes $1,000 an hour convincing the person that makes $20 an hour that his real problem is the person that makes minimum wage. And I believe that the effective messaging here, or in fact, the real problem is the person that makes less than minimum wage, immigrants who are doing labor below minimum wage, that's who our real problem is. And I believe that the effective messaging is to flip that scarcity mindset. It is an abundance narrative that there is enough for all of us. There's enough for us to have what we need. The real problem is that the people that have too much want to take from you so that they can have even more. And we have found that 73% of Americans believe, and that 73% of all Americans, not just Democrats, believe that billionaires and special interests have rigged the system and rigged the rules to keep themselves rich. And so I believe that's a message that breaks through. I believe that Democrats can be credible messengers of that message, but it's one that they have to own, and give credence and give example to. And the examples cannot be more clear than the richest man in the world, going into the White House and pillaging the American government. The examples can't be more clear than a big ugly bill that takes healthcare from poor people and gives to billionaires. The examples are there. We just have to carry the message now.
Yeah, yeah. So are you seeing like sort of additional patterns of people who feel overloaded in terms of what they then do, how they respond, what you'd like to see them do? I mean, what's the answer there?
Uh, an oversimplification I like to say is that those folks have gone to brunch. That is a gross oversimplification, but Democratic electorate is really breaking into these kind of three groups of media consumption. One group is furious. They believe the world is on fire and they are furious about it and don't believe that anyone is fighting hard enough to protect it. One group believes the world is on fire and believes that that's exactly what should happen, that the world sucked and it sucked for them and that it needed to burn. And then the rest of the Democratic electorate, which I believe is a majority of the Democratic electorate, is just fatigued.
Mhm.
right? They are just withdrawn and checked out. And those are the folks that we're going to need to turn the tide on this, and not just to defeat what's happening now, but to build what comes next. Because I don't think that we're going to simply be able to repair what has been broken. We're going to have to start envisioning the next body politic, the next society, the next economy that works better for everybody.
Chrissy,
No,
could I
helpful.
possibly jump in and echo something that Terrence just said? That okay,
Absolutely.
excellent. So I think that so much of what Terrence just shared, I want to underline it like 16 times, and just say my experience has been. So I was at the FTC for 3 years, and I came in, and I still am. I'm a Democrat. I'm a progressive, and but when you're at an organization whose fundamental job is to fight, fraudsters and monopolists, like billionaire fraudsters and monopolists, you start seeing that certain messages are much more powerful than this traditional frame of left versus right. And so the thing about this frame of like the left versus the right is, and there's a degree to which in this two-party system you're never going to escape that, but these institutions are degraded, right? And number one, number two, it's very hard to persuade someone on the right to come over to the left, and very hard to persuade someone on the left to go over to the right. But I think what Terrence is highlighting is, if this isn't the fight you're focused on, but you're focused on the fight of the extremely wealthy oligarchic top versus everybody else, there are so many alliances and coalitions that can be built that previously seemed impossible. And I'll just give you one very concrete example. Two of the very last visits I did as an FTC commissioner, one was to a room full of rideshare drivers in the Upper West Side in New York. And these are almost all immigrants, South Asian, Latin American, African. So first generation Americans, right? First generation immigrants. And a lot of them had paid $60,000, $90,000 for a car to get those really nice, like Uber Black rides. And suddenly those apps were freezing them out of the system with no explanation, right? And so they'd had this like set, steady employment. And it had been pretty good for them for a while, but suddenly the apps just froze them out, locked them out, and said, "You're not coming in here," and without very little explanation. And I'm oversimplifying what is this very complicated situation, but you have that. My last visit was to a bunch of Iowa farmers, where one of the speakers was a guy named Sean Dengler, and he stood up and he said, "Hey, yeah, look, my family's been farming Tama County, Iowa since 1910. And it's just become harder and harder every year because all this consolidation. And then this last season, we set a date for the harvest, turned on the combine. It started roaring, it started grumbling, it started puttering, and then it stopped. And we used to be able to fix it ourselves, but John Deere has locked down their software so that we can't fix it ourselves. We have to call in this extremely expensive dealership staffer to come in and repair it. Two separate visits, all delayed, not on time. And he said that was the straw that broke our back. That was when we decided to stop farming. And I told him about the guys in the Upper West Side of New York City, and about how their duopoly was shutting them out of the software they needed to put food on the table. And he said that is exactly 100% what I'm dealing with. And there's all these alliances of people who are trying to fight, oligarchic power, billionaire power in this country. And I think we can find a lot more. That frame of things is going to be a lot more compelling than this frame of left versus right.
Mhm. So, from the media perspective, if we were looking for a media environment that feels safer and more trustworthy, especially for those who are most harmed by disinformation, is there one structural change we should be fighting for? Alvaro?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. And my focus, I think, will be on social media. I think one of the great challenges of social media is that the small group of uh, billionaires who own social media are able to use algorithms to distort what we are seeing there. And so I would love to see some sort of regulation of the algorithm, some oversight over the algorithms that they're using. I think it's very difficult to get your arms around content. We can ask them to use fact checkers and hope that they will use fact checkers. But, some of the community fact checking works pretty well. I think the biggest challenge is that we think that there are all these people out there who are Nazis or who think that there is discrimination occurring against white Afrikaners in South Africa because the big tech companies, the social media companies, are distorting the algorithm. There's this whistleblower, a former Facebook data scientist who testified before Congress. And what she said is it's not the content, it is the algorithms that they are using to maximize profits or their message. And so at Facebook, what she discussed was that the more outraged people were, the longer they stayed online. And the longer they stayed online, the more they could charge advertisers for their advertisements. And so what she said is, what if we had regulators who looked at these algorithms? I used to serve on the board of a bank, and we had so many regulators we had to satisfy. We had to satisfy some that there were sufficient funds on reserve to be able to pay out when somebody made a withdrawal, that loans were being fairly distributed among people without race discrimination, that people were not engaging in money laundering or terrorist financing. These are all different regulatory agencies that were overseeing, full access to the books. Come on in, look at the books, make sure we're doing okay. I understand that algorithms might be proprietary and that we don't want to make them public, but why couldn't we have the FTC or perhaps some new specialized federal agency go in and on a periodic basis review the algorithms to make sure they're not being used in a harmful way? Because I think they create a very skewed perspective of reality. You wonder, like, why is everybody online so awful and mean, but everybody in real life seems lovely? It's a very different world online that is being skewed and distorted through these algorithms that are designed to manipulate us.
I'd love to jump in and offer some thoughts on that. And so, Barbara, I was previously of this exact same mind. And then I spent 3 years at FTC, and I have seen, let me keep it super broad and vague. I have seen documents from social media companies evaluating their own algorithms. And let me tell you, it's like very easy to persuade yourself that something looks good. And then as someone on the outside looking at them, it can get really subjective very quickly. And what I have come, the road I think we should take now is more having bright line rules around some of these systems. And so from kind of weaker to stronger, the British did this thing where they turned off affirmative notifications for teenagers overnight. And so it didn't shut down the app. If the kids still wanted to spend all night on the app, they could do that, but they weren't getting pulled back in and woken up by the dings, and bells and whistles overnight. Another thing that could be done is to for some of these chatbots. And by the way, if you haven't heard of these chatbots, if you're listening, like, these are actually exploding in popularity. And there have been a couple New York Times articles about them, but I think people are underestimating the degree to which young people are starting to develop what they view as actual friendships and even sexual relationships with these AI-powered chatbots that are from for-profit companies. But another red line might be the moment a teen expresses suicidal ideation, the whole screen basically just goes to, I think it's 988, right? Like, it just says, like, dial 988, and so having bright line rules that, oh, you're out of bounds, you got to do that. But to this question of how to make this a safer place, I think the cleanest and most effective remedy is to demonetize the online experience for children. So basically say, look, there's no ad revenue. You cannot serve ads against kids below a certain age. And you could do a more vanilla version of this where you say you can't personalize ads to the children. But another way to do it is just say you can't you just can't serve ads against them.
Yeah.
And what this does is it makes it less profitable to pull the kids in. it's not like these platforms, what they love to say is like, oh, we're not going to offer our services to 17-year-olds. Really? No, you're going to offer it because they're going to soon have income, and you want to get users young. And so they'll still offer their services, but the intuition and my instinct is it'll become far, far less addictive. And so yeah, and so basically my experience as a regulator has been it's very hard to evaluate an algorithm, on the four corners of the algorithm. It's much easier to set bright line rules around the outcomes and usage of those algorithms. But yeah, that's just been my experience.
So one of the things I wonder is that, thinking about regulations of any sort, is that we seem to be into a phase where existing regulations are being torn down and pulled apart. And there is not appetite for new ones either. It's supposed to be sort of feel like the Wild West, or let every flower bloom, or, capitalism and entrepreneurship should have free reign, or whatever the reasons are, that seem to be matching this sort of political moment that we're in. How do we combat that? How do we find a way to regulate when people don't want to regulate
Hmm.
something that they don't even understand well enough to know how to regulate?
I'm certainly not in the regulation business, and I will defer to Alvaro there, but I am in the public opinion business, and we've been measuring young people's attitudes towards regulation.
Mm,
And the challenge here is that the generation that is adopting at the fastest rate and that is the most susceptible is also the least accepting of regulation. I mean,
mhm.
one of the quotes from our focus group was, get your government fingers off my TikTok."
Mhm.
Right? And so there is this idea that government comes in and breaks the tool, the platform that has allowed them to express and to understand and to be in community with each other. And so I think we have to continue to expose the risk and the dangers of these platforms. We have to shift public opinion before we can create a demand for regulation, because I don't believe that the power is going to move on this until they're demanded to, especially when they are being persuaded from the other side to not regulate. But to move public opinion, we have to expose the risk and the dangers of this. We have to expose the fact that there are ways to regulate it without breaking it, that there are other countries, other governments, other places that have experimented and successfully applied regulations that don't break it. And that frankly, social media, even some of the social media platforms that we are using, have very different utility. TikTok in China is very different in the impact it is having on young people than TikTok here in America. And so I think if we continue to expose folks not only to the dangers and the risks that it has, but to the alternatives, that there are other ways to do this. There are other ways to have a more conscious social media experience, then I do think we can move public opinion on that, and that is how we create demand for regulation.
Yeah, yeah. No, so helpful. And I don't know, we're going to get to questions from the audience in a few minutes, but I saw one ghost up that I couldn't resist, and it really had to do with whether positive emotions can motivate and activate, or whether it's only hate, fear, and anger. And so, Terrence, I don't know what you were seeing, um, sort of around and in that question, but curious about that.
I hate this. I hate that this is human nature, but but everyone always complains about the pervasive nature of negative campaign ads, and attack ads, and how bombarded, this perception that there is a point of diminishing return. We've said as many bad things as we can about our opponent, and folks stop listening. Well, in fact, those are the things that mobilize and that motivate. I think that we can have a positive aspirational message. I think that message, and I think that this is true both in our politics, in our society, and in our relationship with technology, that the aspirational nature of this message has to be about a world that doesn't exist. The aspirational nature of it has to be imaginative, because we cannot aspire to what we had. We can't aspire to what it used to be. We can't aspire to fix the thing that is the systems um, and the systems and structures that are being broken. We have to now build something different. And I do think that if we can inspire an imagination of what it can be, then that message can be aspirational. But we cannot aspire to have what we had yesterday.
No, that is helpful. Turning to you, Barbara, I mean, do you see that a path for those who are feeling like truth is losing to this sort of narrative war? I mean, do you see what a path
Yeah,
forward might look like?
I do. I think that, social media is still in its infancy. This idea that anybody can be a publisher anywhere and that, we tend to believe what we read. I think that as time goes on, we will become more savvy consumers.
Hmm.
I think the risk there, of course, is that we learn the lesson is that we believe nothing. But instead, I think what one way forward is through our own media literacy. I think that there will always be bad actors out there who are trying to fool us, whether it's for, money, scam, political agenda, mischief, whatever it is. But I think one way we can build resilience against that is by improving our own media literacy. I think that could begin in schools. I think it could also be rolled out to adults through faith communities, libraries, community colleges, and civic organizations. And there are some, pretty basic lessons about media literacy that can be taught, like not just assuming that because you read it in one source that it's accurate, checking to make sure there are multiple sources reporting a claim, making sure the source is a credible source, whether it's a trusted news brand or a public official, as opposed to, some joker online who calls themselves, Eagle Warrior 1776 or something like that.
I know that guy.
Yeah,
I
he
know,
runs all the
I
time.
know that guy. He's been in my
Yeah.
DMs.
Same with deep fakes. Are there ways for us to identify that which is false and that which is not? Some of that may be through laws that requiring labeling of things that have been generated with AI. But I think I'd like to see some regulation, but that requires a political solution. And I don't know that our Congress is there to do anything anytime soon. But I think all of us have the ability to improve our own media literacy. We can take it upon ourselves to learn, or we can try to offer it through schools and civic institutions. I think that's a way that we can start to push back against this threat.
Can I say something there? Because I think Barbara is spot on. I have much more confidence in our ability to train a more critical consumer than I do in our government's ability to regulate technology that I don't think most people in Congress understand. Um, and so when I was in grade school and middle school and high school, I took typing classes. I took keyboard classes. I was tested on how many words I could type a minute. We don't need to teach children today how to hold a keyboard, how to get to QWERTY. And they are learning that before they learn how to talk. They're learning how to operate these devices. We need to teach them how to use these devices more responsibly. We need to teach them the power of reposting and retweeting there's power in that. Now you are a publisher. And I think even the language that Barbara is using is a way to increase media literacy, to create more critical consumers. And again, I do think that in order to even get there, to get society to even aspire to that, we have to expose the risk and the danger. And I do think more whistleblowers and folks are beginning are continuing to do that.
So shifting slightly, Alvaro, the notion of privacy as a civil right is something you've talked about. How does that lens help us see the real stakes of misinformation?
So that idea had to do with kind of the disproportionate burden of surveillance on certain groups. So could be a religious minority, could be a racial minority. I think here what disinformation is extremely effective at is painting disfavored groups in a particular light. And I don't have kind of a big theory for why that is. It's just something I see very easily. And so I think that there is a disparate impact to disinformation. I don't know exactly how that maps, but it's something I feel like I live every time I log online and I see, the For You page on X. It's a cesspool that is trying to tell me that I think both Barbara and Terrence said that someone who doesn't look like me is my enemy. And for whatever reason, those messages, I don't know if they trigger some kind of animal part of our brains, and so people respond to them. Those messages seem to be very prevalent, at least in online disinformation.
Do you, Terrence and Barbara, see examples of disinformation either in your or community in terms of what those consequences are to folks?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, do you see, if we're seeing disinformation as a national crisis, what are the local or personal consequences that you may be seeing in your own work or communities? Where do you see it unfolding?
So, a part of what makes it effective, just kind of building off of where Alvaro left off, and like what makes this kind of content so effective is that um pain needs a reason. When someone's life sucks, they need a reason for why it sucks, and it can't be me. It can't, if I'm working twice as hard and I'm following the rules and I'm doing my part, my life doesn't suck because of me. There's got to be something to explain this life I'm living. And so that's where the zero sum misinformation and the zero sum narrative becomes effective. But the other reason is because bias needs a justification. When you hold these, even when it's unconscious bias, you need to justify it. It's not just because you're racist, it's because of that video. It's because of that violence that I keep seeing. It's because of that, those threats that are in my community. And so I think this is the dark part of this administration is that it is feeding um, a primal psychology and I believe it is distracting from the actual reason for the pain. If the pain needs a name, then I mean, if we had to give it one name, it could be Elon. But more broadly, it is it is the richest people in the world that are taking from you so that they can have more.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'll just add this. I also think that a big part of disinformation these days is aimed at identity. There is this sort of feeling of tribalism where people don't seem to even care about the details. What they really care about is whether it's our side or your side, good guys or bad guys. And part of that has been this divide and conquer strategy of building resentment and grievance, and there are people willing to go along with lies, even when they, don't even know them to be true, right? Like a stolen election. We had people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz voting against certification of the election. And it seemed to me part of that was just sort of signaling that I'm on, Team Trump. I'm on the Republican team. Did they really believe that despite 61 out of 61 lost lawsuits, still there was some as yet undetected fraud in the election without any basis? I don't think so. And so I think people's willingness to subvert their own integrity for the
Mm.
purpose of going along with the tribe. And, at those highest levels, it's really cynical. But I think I see it even among law students. There's students who identify themselves as either progressive or liberal. And instead of considering various arguments where they stand on, everything from gun control to affirmative action to tax policy and whatever it is, it almost seems to me like they first ask, what side is my team on? And then I'll tell you what I think about that issue, as opposed to figuring out where they stand on an issue, and then saying, oh, I agree with, this party on 90% of what it stands for, but I disagree on this thing. Nobody wants to stand out as disagreeing on this thing lest they alienate the fellow members of their team. They don't want to be cast out or labeled one of them, because them have become so demonized.
Hmm.
It causes this, false either or choice. There's no room for nuance in between. You're either on, the red team or the blue team, and there is no room for a purple team.
And if I'm one of them, then I'm not only do I risk being wrong, I risk being bad. I risk being evil. It's not just that I could be wrong on this issue, it's that I'm a bad person if
Mhm.
I am not with my tribe or with my team on this thing. And look, one of the things I think has been most pervasive about the rise of mis and disinformation is how it undermines facts. How it undermines, I mean, facts used to be the foundation of truth, right? Truth was my lived experience and the facts, and sometimes I have to reconcile those things to get to the truth. Well, now truth is some combination of my lived experience and whatever alternative facts fit my lived experience, right? Equals my truth. And there could be different truths because I could have my truth and you can have your truth. And that's not exactly how truth used to work. And that's what I believe has been the most undermining of this kind of pervasive shift in our politics and our communication. And I think the only way to overcome that, I see some questions here about effective communication. One of the things I think we have to do is change who is to blame for the pain. We have to change from zero sum. Your pain is because of people that are not like you to the actual culprit, which are the billionaires and the special interests that are rigging the system. But the other part of effective communication is communicating on values, right, that are less subject to the cynical nature of truth. That values are where we can find more common appreciation, more common acceptance of just commonly held values like we all want to support and provide for our families, or we all want to contribute to society. We all just want to be safe. That when we can start our communication there instead of starting at the facts that are often in dispute, then we're not starting the conversation in dispute.
That's interesting. I mean, that's sort of where I was headed next was just how do we communicate truth in a way that's not just factual, but emotionally resonant and mobilizing?
I'm happy to jump in. I haven't studied this or operated in this space like my fellow panelists, but I've had a very specific experience, which was getting illegally fired by the president while I was at my daughter's gymnastics class a couple months ago, and we had, my fellow commissioner, Commissioner Becca and I had kind of um, agreed to a certain strategy beforehand. And I feel like that has connected with folks for a couple different reasons. Um, and so your question is, how do we make these messages in a way that's resonant? So first thing, we decided to be loud, right? We didn't. I think a lot of the response in these circumstances from boring lawyers like us is like, I object to this firing and I shall have my day in court, and then you stay quiet until your court date and you maybe give an interview to the New York Times, right? Um, and instead what we did was flood the zone. We went on every single podcast, every single TV show, everything in between. Number one. Number two, we also did video and audio. And so, yes, we did the traditional 8.5 by 11-inch statements, but we also, cut a bunch of videos of us just direct to camera talking about our situation. They weren't terribly polished, but I think the feedback I've gotten is that resonated with people. That it was clearly just a regular, uh, 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 um, the videos I did, it was like, oh, you seem like a regular person talking to camera about your experiences. And then I think the third thing we did is along the whole of our tenure was to try to not take ourselves too seriously, in the sense that we kind of made fun of the people who were trying to push us out, and we were constantly poking them in the eye online on social media. And so I think that's another thing that I found to be effective, which is a lot of the people that are inflicting so much pain in this administration on everyone else, it's actually really important for them to have this like very manly, traditionally manly presence on social media where they're big and bad and tough. And what I found is that if you poke at that a little bit and you make fun of them and you tease them, sometimes they take the bait and they respond, and it can really show, you can really get under their feathers. And so for us, this combination of being loud, of using audio, using video, and using social media strategically, that was very effective. The last thing I'll say that a lot of people responded to was not going along with it. And so for months after the attempt to fire us, I had to resign in June 9th because I needed another job. But we would call ourselves commissioners, right? We would say, oh, Commissioner Slaughter, Commissioner Bedoya. We would issue statements that say at the top, Commissioner Bedoya, Commissioner Slaughter. We would, I visited with small business owners as a commissioner, and that was kind of a little radical act of saying, like, no, you didn't fire me, it was illegal. I'm not going along with it. And this is how we push back. And so all those, not going along with it. And the last thing I'll say that was very effective in our case was, I think, meeting disorder with disorder, not following that instinct when someone does something crazy. Like, if anyone as a parent is watching this, like, young kids do crazy stuff, older kids do crazy stuff. Your instinct is, the good parental instinct is to try to remain calm, try to bring order into the situation. But it's actually, in this political policy sense, quite effective to just be crazy right back. And we found to have a lot. I think that we've got a lot of positive feedback from all those strategies that we took.
Thank you. No, that is interesting, and it's interesting to see sort of really the ability to test some of this stuff and see how it works or resonates and how it feels even to you. We are to audience question part, and so I've been looking through what we have gotten in. I mean, I guess one of the questions that we see is sort of what communication strategies, and you've maybe touched on a few, Alvaro, are best for connecting people who feel left behind, and how can organizations and nonprofits measure whether their messaging is working, cutting through the noise, reaching people? What are some practical sort of tips or tools?
Well,
Oh, go ahead, Barbara.
Well, I'll say one thing. I don't know how to measure whether people's messaging is resonating through others, but I will say, don't underestimate the ability for all of us to influence people within our own social sphere. Research shows that people are most influenced by their friends, family members, and neighbors about things. And so I think sometimes it's tempting to avoid engaging on those issues with people, like, oh, here comes Joe, the neighbor, the one who thinks, the election was stolen and that Barack Obama committed treason, and maybe you want to avoid that person. But I think finding common ground with people like that can be really important, because if people we admire, there's this theory of cognitive dissonance. If people we admire and agree with and respect think something or have a particular view, we want to either change their view or change our opinion of them. And so if it is someone we like and someone we know, someone who respects us, and you say, no, I think that is nonsense. There have been, 5 investigations into the origins of the Russia investigation, and every one of them said it was properly predicated and not politically motivated. Maybe they don't admit it out loud to you, but maybe, crazy neighbor Joe says, Barb thinks that. I think highly of Barb. Maybe I ought to reconsider my view. Maybe he'll never tell you that out loud, but I think that if we can talk with our friends and neighbors, family members, whoever it is, in a respectful way, listen to them, be curious, show respect, I think maybe we can get people to reach their own conclusions that things are false, that they're not being told the whole truth, that maybe their, tribal instincts are not always reflect accurate facts.
Look, I would completely agree with that. The data has shown that in the rise of alternative facts, of mis and disinformation, of deep fakes, that the most trusted messengers in society are friends and family. The people that we know are the people that we trust. Politicians used to go do a lot of work recruiting trusted messengers and validators and endorsers. Well, now the most trusted validator and the most trusted messenger are the friends and family of the voters that you're trying to reach, and that's a very different kind of organizing tactic. But along with that is to Barbara's point, I think that this may be the most important, especially for Democrats. It is the listening part. The most effective way to communicate with folks that have been susceptible to mis and disinformation is to listen with compassion and to not judge the things that they believe. Crazy neighbor Joe cannot think that you think he's crazy.
Right.
And frankly, that is what's happening, right? I have Democrats who tell me that, they can't do barbershop tours anymore because they're offended by what they hear there, or I don't go to Thanksgiving anymore because I cannot even engage with my crazy ass uncle who thinks the election was stolen. Those people know that we're offended by them. They know that as soon as they say, I don't know if a woman should be president, that we don't just think they're wrong, we think they're bad, we think they're evil, we think they're not like us, we think they don't belong around us. They feel that, as opposed to what I have to do in my career, which is, why do you think that? What have you heard? What have you been exposed to make you believe that? Because once I understand why you believe that, maybe it's because you've never seen a woman head of state. Well, now I have information I could expose to you that might change how you feel when you learn that, in fact, there have been women heads of state around the world since the beginning of time. Nations don't fall. Margaret Thatcher didn't kill the UK. And so, but that requires first listening with compassion and not judging what they believe, especially when what they believe has been informed by mis and disinformation. Those are victims of mis and disinformation. And if we listen with that compassion, we may be able to dismantle some of it.
Yeah, yeah. Just a few minutes left. I want to see if we can capture one or two more. One question that we're seeing is like what leaders outside the Beltway seem to be getting it right when it comes to communicating the need to build what's next. I mean, you talked so eloquently about we can't aspire to what we had. We have to build something new. And so when we're thinking about that, who's capturing that spirit and how important is it that we do that?
I mean, frankly, I don't hear a lot of people talking about what's next. I think of it in this kind of three world paradigm, right? There's the world that we had, which we have lost, and Republicans are actively building the second world as they see it. Um, and right now, as far as I can see, Democrats are trying to reclaim the first world. We're trying to get the first world back. And we haven't started building the next world yet. And frankly, the reason we lost is because they don't want that world anymore. They don't want to go back to World One. And so right now we have to express outrage about World Two because this is crazy. And I think Democrats are missing the outrage in some of this. And that's why you see leaders like Jasmine Crockett, AOC, Bernie Sanders. When I ask in focus groups who is fighting for you, when I ask Democrats and I ask this question in every focus group, who is fighting for you? The first answer is nobody. Full stop. That is universal. Nobody's fighting for me. But when I probe them and make them give me a name, it is names like Jasmine Crockett, AOC, Bernie Sanders, and everyone they're listing are people that are expressing, that are matching an outrageous moment with equal outrage. And so that's the first part, is be outraged about World Two, but then be aspirational about World Three. And I don't even think we've gotten to that part yet.
Additional thoughts, anyone? So then the other, let's see if we can get in one more. The other was sort of around nonprofits being seen as a threat and sort of how do we,
Hmm.
sort of fight and support when those core relationships. And so, that if there's an extension of friends and family, it is how many nonprofits show up in community. And so how do they maintain and grow their presence and capacity and capability while in the, sort of in the face of either both the second world, but also all of these pieces that have come with it.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, having worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office in conjunction with nonprofits, foundations, non-government organizations, they make up a really important part of the social safety net and provide an awful lot of services to the public. And yet we are seeing the Trump administration, accuse them of things like woke DEI policies, removing grants, defunding aid in ways that are going to make it more difficult for them to do their work. And I think that's going to really come home to roost and see a lot of harm. Maybe it takes seeing harm to rural communities before people wake up and realize they've been voting against their own financial self-interest. And one of the reasons they've been doing that is because they've had a party that's been telling them that their real enemy are the Black and brown people who are stealing their jobs. When, of course, in fact, the real reason that people in lower economic strata are suffering is because of the incredible wealth disparity that has existed and expanded since the 1980s through corporate tax cuts and sending jobs overseas and escalating CEO salaries and some of those kinds of things. And so I think helping people understand the economics. I think the greatest threat to America right now is this wealth disparity. And I think disinformation is a way to reward the wealthy and keep the less wealthy at bay by dividing and conquering and making them believe that their real enemy are, immigrants in the LGBTQ community, when in fact their real enemy is economic policies that are harming their pocketbooks.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right.
A last question for you, Terrence, is just coming over. It's sort of how can one, and this is good for you too, Alvaro, how can one be outspoken when doing so sort of invites all the crazy nutheads to attack, threaten, harass, etc.? I mean, it creates such ugliness and sort of fear and uncertainty. I mean, how do we be bold in this moment when at the same time it is so frightening?
You know, I think Barbara said this at the beginning, is that the real world is so much more pleasant than online, that the messages that I get every time I do a media appearances, some of the content, the feedback, the DMs, the comments are so gross, that I just had to disengage. Unfortunately, I don't know that I have a lot of recommendation there, except for like engage in the real world and not the digital world, because people are themselves in person. And I don't think that what we're seeing, I think online what we're seeing is just a collective vitriol that, that to your point is incentivized by more likes, more hearts, more responses, the darker and more divisive it is. And that's just not who people are in person. I sit in focus groups every single day with folks that I disagree with on every single issue. And those people don't hate me. And I don't hate them. The way that hate is just comes across a keyboard in such a visceral way. And so engage in the real world, try to disengage online, and cut off your comments and stay out of your DMs.
So I agree with everything Terrence said. I think I've had a bit of an experience where the online world became the real world necessarily. So basically, after we started speaking out against our illegal firing,
You muted yourself.
the night that we were fired, both me and Commissioner Slaughter got the pizzas at our doors. So people were communicating to us that we know where you live. Someone keeps trying to take out a line of credit under my name. This is all after the firing. And so my advice would be, if you are going to be outspoken in a way where you're going to get that 15 minutes of fame, as I got and Commissioner Slaughter got, I think you just need to go in with your eyes open. There is no having your cake and eat it too. You have to, so I have all my credit's frozen. I've got fraud alerts on all my credit. I'm on the, I forget the name of it, but there's a list in my county of addresses where if a SWAT team is called in, They know that this is probably not an actual SWAT call. This is someone getting swatted, and I'm taking steps to delete my address from online. And so these are all just concrete steps you can take. And once you start engaging with the world after having taken those steps, you feel a lot better about it. But the sad fact is that you do have to think about it. It would be irresponsible not to think about it. You just have to face it squarely and take precautions, and then take measured risks.
All right. I'm sorry you've had that experience.
It's
Thank
okay.
you all
It's part
for
of the
this.
part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That is like you are living this conversation. This was great. Really, thanks to all of you panelists, viewers, everyone, for a really robust and engaging conversation. We at Raben are sort of with you in this fight, and we hope that you'll reach out to us if there's anything we can do. You can reach us at info@raben.co. Our website is raben.co. We're on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We're everywhere. And we'll share this recording and we will upload it to our YouTube channel. So many thanks again. I hope this is the beginning, not the end of the conversation, but as we go along, hoping for more wins than losses and a real better understanding of how we can shape and shift perception around truth and how we engage with others. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.